it's
definitely.
just it just made sense, I think, and they happened to see. I don't know, Zach, do you guys remember where you first came across my stuff or my name?
Maybe Amazon.
Oh,
Look.
really?
Yeah.
Amazon.
I remember LinkedIn messages, I think, was one of the early reach outs, was like via LinkedIn or something. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I don't spend a lot of time on
talked.
LinkedIn, but
I don't think we originally talked through there, but recently, because we had conversations a couple of years back, and we actually met. I was working at my hospital before my last hospital, so that was at least 2 years ago. It was probably more like 3 years ago when we first spoke, and it was the morning for me, the early morning for me, and I think we met at like 7 in the morning or something like that at that point. And then last time we met was like, I don't know, I think it was like 5 in the morning our time. What time is it for you guys right now?
9 a.m.
9 a.m. All right. Okay, that
yeah.
works. That works. Not too shabby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was like that. We had good conversation. Had a lot of questions. Hey, Sam, what's up? Thanks for joining. It's really happening.
Yeah. Hi, Sam.
Yeah, we kind of reached out to Anthony mostly because there wasn't many others who we could find online who worked with the animal. So even locally, it's quite limited number of people who even know about this animal, let alone take an interest in it. So
Yeah.
we reached out to again less than 5 people, and Anthony was very keen to discuss this species since he had one at home. So yeah, it was quite interesting because we hadn't talked to, I don't think, anybody at that point who had any experience at all. I don't even think we had seen one in the wild when we spoke with Anthony. We always had trouble finding them. They're really hard to find.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. But yeah, always keen to have a conversation about these. And the interesting thing too here in the United States is just how they're not in zoos either. So anyway, we can get into all of that more once we officially go live and everything. So anyway, we're seeing it now, Matthew. It should be there. Just saying. I'm just reading Steve's response.
Yeah.
So we normally just get started with a little bit of conversation like this before we actually officially go live. It gives us a chance to actually get some live viewers rounded up before we go live officially. So I mean, we're live, but we're not. The show hasn't started yet. Know what I mean?
Are any of you interested to come to Okinawa?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and one of our other board members, when we were talking about it this weekend, she's like, "Would this mean I'd have a chance to go to Okinawa and see them in the wild?" Like, she loves traveling around to actually go do the work and see it out there in the wild and stuff. So, yeah.
It's not so far. I used to go back and forth from the U.S. to here, maybe once a month or every other month.
Oh, wow.
For a year. So you get used to it. It's not a bad flight at all, especially if you're flying from. I was flying out of Seattle, so.
Okay.
Tell me more.
Yeah, how long is the flight?
Yeah, tell me more. I have all the questions about this.
Yeah.
Maybe less than 14 hours, I think.
Okay.
Which by the time you get settled on the flight and you're organized or whatever, if you time it right, you can like literally go to bed and then wake up and you're there. That's sort of the easy part.
I've done 14 hours driving from the Outer Banks to Nashville. So 14 hours is like, on a plane, that'd be way easier. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, there's worse flights, but there's definitely, it's not like flying around the U.S., I think, where you can get where you need in probably less than 6 hours, I assume.
Yeah, mostly, yeah.
Yeah. Are you originally from Seattle?
I'm not. I'm actually from Tennessee originally.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Where in Tennessee?
Closer to Memphis, so on the maybe 1 to hour and a half from Memphis.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, my parents and my brother live in Nashville these days, so.
I didn't realize that, Zach.
Alright.
For some reason, I thought you were from Ohio. I don't know. What do you want to roll it in, Steve? Do it, man.
Yeah, we've got a good crowd here. Let's roll it in and get going here. So, where is it? There it is.
Welcome to the Pondcast, the destination for insightful discussions and interviews on the appreciation, conservation, and husbandry of reptiles, with a focus on turtles and tortoises. Now, let's join our team of turtle nerds.
We don't have to
All
say
right.
it.
I know, you have to say it. You have to say it.
We're all
I was just gonna say, hey, you all look so young in there at this point, right? Like,
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. I went bald.
Welcome to the Pondcast. I thought this was episode 105. I messed that up.
This is 105.
it says 105.
It says
Yeah, it
104.
says 104 at
Yeah, I
the top.
see 104 at the top there, but YouTube has 105.
Perfect. Well, that's a start. Good. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Pondcast, episode 105. We're your hosts, Kevin, Steve, Emily. We're all here. We're really excited for this one. I can't remember the last time we had international guests on. That's a shame because this new platform obviously works for that. And it is 7:09 p.m. Eastern time where we are right now, and it is 9:09 in the morning where our guests are. We have Zach and Aya joining us from Okinawa in Japan. Well, I mean, people think Okinawa, Japan, but really you're far from mainland Japan in the Ryukyu Islands. And they're going to talk to us today about a very exciting little turtle that I happen to love. And we met years ago virtually because of that shared love for this little turtle. So, Zach, Aya, can you tell us what that little turtle is and say hello to everybody?
Hi, my name is Zach.
My name is Aya.
Yeah, and that little
Oh.
turtle is known locally as the Yamagame, so it's the mountain turtle. And it's pretty much restricted to Okinawa Island. There's two other islands it's been found that, routinely. One's called Kumejima, or Kume Island, and another one is called Ukashiki Island. And that's sort of where it's mostly found, other than a few other, rare instances. But Okinawa, especially the northern part, is the main site for people to, see them, especially in the wild.
How big are those other two islands in comparison to Okinawa?
Great question.
Smaller, for sure.
Okay.
So I guess
We go around less than 1 hour.
1 hour you can drive around the entire island.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Compared to
Really?
Okinawa, relative, obviously the speed limit changes, but to go from the south of Okinawa Island to the north, maybe 5 hours, 5-6
Okay.
hours.
Okay, significant difference. Okay. I didn't realize Okinawa was actually that big. So that's interesting to me. So, you
That's
see
a
it on the
great
map
question.
and it's just like it's tiny, right? So, but
It
that's
is
cool to
tiny.
hear. I had no idea it would take that long to drive from one end to the other. So that's bigger than Connecticut.
That's what I was just thinking. I was like, that's Connecticut compared to New England. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
You better believe it. Yep.
I should point out that the speed limit is you can't drive fast here like in the US. Like there's only one expressway here. It's obviously not an interstate, but there's an expressway, and I think top speed you can go is 80 kilometers per hour.
Okay.
I don't know what that is in miles per hour, but that's the fastest. Normally you're going 40 to 50, so it's quite slow.
Mhm.
That might explain the distance.
The time it takes to
That's
drive.
that is about 60 miles an hour though, give or take. 60,
Yeah, but that's
65. So
that's one road in the whole on the whole
yeah.
island. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Now you mentioned that it's Yamagame. So for anyone who looked at the post that we made to promote this show, you saw a picture of a Yamagame that was produced by me here in the United States, a captive bred one, an F2 actually, that was produced from captive bred parents. And that's something that happens very rarely in the United States. And we can get into why that is too. But that is just in case anyone's wondering. So we'll refer to them for the rest of this show as the Yamagame because that's a really simple way to call them out without saying the full Geoemyda japonica, although most people in the U.S. just call them japonica. But there are two Japanese turtle species that have the same species name, japonica. So we'll stick with Yamagami for that reason there. And then also the common name, the Ryukyu Black-Breasted Leaf Turtle, that's like a lot of syllables. So we'll shorten that to just, we call them the Yamagami. It's just still 4 syllables, but a nice one word name.
Anthony, you sound like you have a sock in your mouth.
Thank you very much.
There we go. That's better.
There you go.
Yeah, and
Not sure what happened there.
Anthony, and I guess everyone listening, most of the turtles here also they all are black-breasted sort of, so the name isn't as useful.
Yeah.
It's a great point. Am I still muffled? Do I need to change headphones?
No, it's better. It's better.
Oh yeah, much better.
Why was I muffled?
I think you might have just leaned down just enough that I don't know for sure, but.
Oh, that's awkward. Okay. So I'm not going to be the next one to talk because I'm scared that I'm going to be muffled. So please.
Okay. Is this the main species that you guys work with?
It is. Yeah. We're really mostly interested in the Yamagame, but there's 2 other species that there's the potential for some habitat crossover or hybridization. So we also are trying to keep those, in the back of our minds as well. So we're trying to do more work with them. So one of those is the yellow pond turtle, and then the other one is the yellow margined box turtle. So both of those are found in the islands around Okinawa Island, but they're not native to the main island that we live on. So, and they hybridize with the Yamagame. So we have to keep an eye out for those types of animals, especially the yellow pond turtle.
Are there any major physical differences that you see when they start to hybridize? Is it very obvious, or is it kind of fly under the radar?
It's quite obvious. For sure, yeah. They don't look anything like Yamagame. Yamagame is a very small turtle. Small is, I'm trying to think of an object, but it's small. It could fit in your hand. Versus the yellow pond turtles can be, quite large. They're maybe like this big. Some of the adults, and then the box turtles obviously have very high domed shell. And so they're quite. When you hybridize that with this small little turtle, you can see the difference.
Yeah. Do they have different conservation statuses?
It's a tricky one because I can probably speak to it more than I can, but in a nutshell, although the problem is they're found in mainland China, and because they have a different protection there, and in here in the islands, it's almost the same species, but the status is considered different. So, for example, the yellow pond turtle is sort of everywhere here, but I believe in mainland China, it is sort of more of a rare species and is protected. And then the box turtle here is also only supposed to be on 2 islands, and it's also so it shouldn't be here, but it's also a highly protected animal and endangered. So even though it is an invasive species in Okinawa Island, you still can't touch the animal or mess with it, even though it is invasive. So it's a weird status that they have. But you want to say anything?
We are now in university, but some people found that box turtle on the campus, so they shouldn't be there. But
Yeah,
sounds
even
like
this we're on the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology right now, main campus, and you can just around here it's quite beautiful landscape, and these turtles are spotted quite routinely by students and postdocs just on the sidewalk. So they're here. They shouldn't be here, but it's still sort of rare. I've yet to see one myself spot it first. People will message us and say, "There's a turtle. Come look." But we never see them. They're hard to find. Yamagame is, I think we've had better luck.
Yeah, that was really interesting to me when we discussed this, is that both the Meremi's Mutica cami, or cami, which is the yellow pond turtle that lives on the Ryukyus, is not considered native to Okinawa, if I remember this correctly. And same thing with the Cora flavomarginata evelene, the Ryukyu box turtle, also not native to Okinawa, which surprised me because that's the bigger island, right? And I just assumed that these Ryukyu animals, especially if they were an issue for hybridization these days, would have been native to that island since they're native to the Ryukyu Islands.
Yeah, as I see your point. So there's a cluster of islands called the Yaeyama Islands. It's between 8 and 10, depending on who you ask. But there's 8 larger ones. And this is really where the yellow pond turtle seems to be found throughout there. So that in the name of the yellow pond turtle in Japanese is the Yaeyama Ishigame, which means the Yaeyama stone turtle. And that's sort of where it's found in those islands. So anytime it's found outside of those islands, it's considered invasive. But the box turtle also has Yaeyama in the name as well. So it's the Yaeyama Semaru Hakugame, which means the Yaeyama from the Yaeyama Islands. And it's we don't know what Semaru means, but Hakugame means box turtle, box haku. But this one's typically supposed to only be found in Ishigaki-jima, so it's one of the larger islands of Yaeyama Islands, and then Iriamote.
So, for our viewers, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Yaeyama Islands are the closest islands to Taiwan of the archipelago, correct?
I think that's true.
Okay.
The closest island that I know of is Yonaguni Island. So if that's part of the Yaeyama Islands, then yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I should mention that, for clarity, Japan is broken into prefectures similar to the United States is broken into states.
Right.
And so there's 47 prefectures. Okinawa prefecture includes Okinawa Island as well as 54 other islands. So 55 islands in total, but just that main island, the largest, is called Okinawa Island. But there's all these other islands around it, and they're sort of named in sort of clusters depending on how far they are from here. But they're all part of the Okinawa prefecture as a whole, or you can think of it as the state.
Okay.
So we have a question from somebody. I apologize, guys. I'm having technical difficulties. There we go. So we have a question from somebody in the audience, Sam Shulman. So compared to the past, how are these animals doing in the wild? Are they declining, improving? Are field surveys being done?
Great. Okay, do you want to answer? Okay. So that question is asked all the time. How are they doing? How's their status? Everyone thinks that they are, highly endangered and that they're very scarce. And the reality is we don't know. Nobody knows. That's sort of why we're doing the field surveys here in Okinawa. But I can kind of, I guess, shed some light in sort of from more anecdotes. And one being that the longest running study is about a little over 20 years now by Mr. Otani. So he's considered widely as the world expert in this species, and his field site is only roughly 3 kilometers long. So that data is the best data that we have on how they look in the wild. And so 3 kilometers is not very long at all. You were talking, at least that's a little over a mile. And this is essentially a path through a secondary forest into, a mountainous region. And the field site is, simply make it from one end to the other as fast as possible. And over a 20-year period, they found over 900 unique animals. And in total, around 1,600, animals in total. That includes the recaptures. Some of these animals have been recaptured up to 16 times, but 900 unique individuals in this small area. So we don't know if that is a good representation of the population, or that's a good sample. We hope that that's just a small sample of the population, but we do know from locals as well as naturalists, especially photographers who go into the Ombaru forest, which is where they're found, that they see less of them now. And we also know that there's more concerns of them being hit by cars. So I guess the answer to your question is we don't know, and it appears that they could be declining, especially the recaptures are less than they used to be. But again, we don't know why that could be, and we don't have any evidence. But that's why we are conducting these field studies, really picking up for Mr. Otani study to continue it on and expand it.
Yeah, so that's actually about the same amount of ground that we cover in our 2 different wood turtle surveys. We have a total of 3.25 kilometers that we cover with wood turtles here in Pennsylvania. So I thought it was just interesting that it's about the same length of survey area that we're used to.
It's extremely interesting. We should also add too that they're so sought after that the species is still smuggled. Now, I've never seen. Well, I shouldn't say never. Never say never. Justin Bieber. There were some, I think, smuggled into the U.S. around 2015 by a guy who got arrested, who was coming in through Ohio from Canada. That's the only time I can remember in my days somebody smuggling the species that I was privy to. However, I do see them show up in Asia, in different parts of Asia, and also parts of Europe as well. So I think, and that's interesting considering if you saw Phil Simpson here said that they're known as a national natural monument in Japan. They have not been, they've not left Japan legally, besides maybe some outlier situation that I don't know about, since the mid 70s. So, and I would say to Phil's point too, he said that they're known as the national natural monument, but it's actually they're a national natural monument. They're not the only, if I'm not mistaken. So, anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there too, that this is a species that, because these islands are so small and they are still making their way off the island, that taking a couple bushel-fulls of these, couple bags full of these turtles would be extremely detrimental to them. So I would say that, in addition to the fact that they're already that people are already seeing less of them, is cause for concern for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned that sort of the national monument status is, from the outsider's view, it seems like you're putting the animal on this pedestal, but reality is it's sort of a very, in this part of the world, a risk reduction measure. Instead of, going out and doing these field studies and doing all of this work, the point is that can potentially cause risk, right? More people could see the animal during that survey. More people could potentially harm the animal, steal it, introduce something, damage the environment. So it's easier just to say, don't touch it. And that's a very Japanese approach to risk reduction. Don't touch it. And that's why people think, oh, it's maybe highly endangered. And it very well could be. We don't have that data, but I guess the problem is, because of that restriction, that's one of the reasons it's so difficult to even do the research. Is we've been at this since 2020, and only now has I been able to procure the license to even touch the animal, just touch the animal to move it off of a road. So it's quite restricted. And there's only 3 individuals, and they all work with us, or we work with them as a team. So it's very rare to be able to even do the research. But the fact that they're a national monument isn't, I think, something that it doesn't really mean anything to me, because a lot of animals here are considered national monuments that may or may not be endangered as well. And again, they tend to be those that are either there's maybe some community outcry because they're hit by the cars on the road, or that they're seeing less of them. So it's like, instead of doing an in-depth analysis, let's just call them a national monument, put them on some T-shirts, make some road signs, and people will leave them alone. That's the simplest, fastest way to do it in their opinion. And that's kind of where we're at now.
Kudos to you. Like, congratulations on being able to get the permits, Aya. That's amazing. I'm so happy for you and grateful for your efforts. That's incredible.
Can I ask you a question? Just a follow-up to that. What is the vetting process like? So if you've been at it for 3 years and this is like your field of focus, what does it look like in terms of like getting that permit?
Do you want to talk about Japanese hierarchy and academia?
we can skip if it's not perfect for this,
I guess at a high level, one person has to take responsibility in Japan for anything, and that's a cultural thing. You have to take responsibility, and because there's some level of responsibility to the person who lives here the longest, who's sort of the herpetologist, who's a professor here, everything goes under him. And so that's why you can think of all of the levels and people in between. You've got some people locally who want to work with this turtle. You have to kind of work your way up over time, meet the right people, go to the meetings. Everything's about relationship building and maintaining the harmony in Japan. They don't care what your intentions are. But that's sort of the vetting process. Are you willing to work your way up, through these people and go to these meetings and really, show that you care and, spend the time. That's part of the vetting process. But there's no particular credentials that they look for, anything like that I'm aware of.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I'd like to take this opportunity to also discuss just, what you've learned about the Yamagame in general. I think, there's a lot of work, that you have to put into behind the scenes to make this all possible, but you've also been able to spend time with the animals in the wild. You've been able to observe them, and there's been some interesting things, some things that I've found extremely interesting in our past discussions about the species, like the difference between the size of some of these captive, born, and raised animals and those wild animals. And we see that in the ones that were smuggled or imported, because some were. So I'll just say too, for anyone who's watching, I'll go off on this little tangent just so you know the situation. The Yamagame, or the Ryukyu Black-Breasted Leaf Turtle, Geoemyda japonica, didn't leave Japan legally very often. Now, there was paperwork that with animals that came legally into the U.S., CITES paperwork that came legally into the U.S. that said that the animals in question that were being imported were captive bred in Hong Kong. Now, the truth of the matter is that those animals were not being bred in Hong Kong. That was more likely a convenient middle place for them to be, smuggled into, for them to then be sent out with the paperwork. So people know this. This is the reason why there are no AZA. Well, I shouldn't say no, because I believe the Turtle Conservancy's Baylor Center in Ojai, California is an AZA institution, but there are no zoos that are open to the public that I know of that have the Yamagame on display or in their collection. And this is the reason why. It's the fruit of the disease tree. Now, interesting aside, this is the same with bearded dragons that never came out of Australia legally, and then this is similar with some other species like that are coming in more recently, like box turtles from Mexico. So just to give you some, and then the question becomes, well, why did the bearded dragons become Americanized and okay over time when they never came out of Australia legally, and why has the Yamagame not become that? And I would say to you, just from my little brain and my outsider's opinion, that's because they haven't been bred very much in captivity. If they were bred so much that nobody had an idea what was going on, there were tens of thousands of them, like there were at some point with bearded dragons, then that might have changed things. But these are a difficult species to breed in captivity. So anyway, we're seeing lots of really cool things coming from you guys. And like I said, seeing that difference between these captive animals that are much bigger than the animals that were imported and the animals that you see in the wild. That was one thing, but you also, shared other things with me that I thought were really interesting. But let's start there. Let's start with the difference in size. Do you know by any chance what one of these animals in the wild weighs? Is that a fair question?
Yeah. So, Mr. Otani, he, has a really nice data set over the past 20 years, as you can imagine. So we actually have very good numbers here. So the males on average weigh 221 grams. That's an adult male. Adult female, 269 grams.
Wow, that's insane.
And that's hundreds of animals average there. The numbers tend to be slightly more skewed towards males because males are found more. So the total average of all of the animals that have been sort of caught, which is roughly 1,600, is 226 grams is the average weight. But once you separate male and female, you do see the sort of sex difference. And that sex difference is statistically significant from those samples.
So to put that in perspective for everyone, I promise that I would have that the ones in captivity our male here is almost 600 grams. So that is a crazy difference. And I actually have the shell of another male that was about 550 grams when he died, a captive bred one that died. I did not have that animal, but I have the shell. So, and I do know of someone in Europe who has some females around 600 grams, but our females are about 400 to about 550, the females here. So that's just wild. I mean, I have one that I hatched that was probably 200 grams at 1 year old. So obviously in captivity, they're getting a very nutrient-rich diet that is accelerating the growth. And we can discuss
not only accelerating but surpassing.
Yes, accelerating and surpassing. It's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, that's wild to think about.
iPhone users, I have an iPhone. I just looked it up. That's between 150 to 250 grams for an iPhone. So if you're like me and you don't have a lot of turtles to compare it to, just your phone. There you go.
The weight of your phone is the weight of an adult wild Yamagame. Yep. That's crazy. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There's, I should say, obviously there's variation in a species. And so when you look at some of the outliers, there are some sort of dots up there way on above, let's say in a box plot or a bar chart, however you're plotting this, but there are a few outliers. And I think the largest that I've seen in his data set was a female at 420 grams. That was the largest. But again, that was for sure an outlier, nowhere near the average.
Is that one that you would worry had been hybridized at that size?
I didn't see that animal. It was. I don't think that it was. It probably would have been, mentioned in the documentation. But that would tell.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
But yeah, they're quite small. I mean, another thing that I've noticed, and she and I will post photos on the Instagram recently, and the shape of the shell is quite different. These have very strong. I think I should say she and I are not turtle biologists by training, so we don't get the terminology right. So please apologize. The keels, is that what they're called? The keels on the shell.
Yeah.
So they're quite pronounced in the wild ones, and they're almost like triangular, like almost like a gumbock type shape, almost as if to be able to right themselves if they fall in the forest. Versus
Uh-huh.
Anthony seems, just like it's as if those kind of balloon out a little bit.
Yes,
Fill
100%. Captive raised animals are wide and flat compared to wild caught animals that are more elongate and more
Interesting.
domed. And then those keels, because they're more domed, those keels are very well pronounced. And it's the three keels, the two keels that run down the middle of the costal scutes, and then that vertebral keel that goes down the middle with it's kind of widened, It's not just like a pointy keel, it's a flat keel, like you see in Chinese box turtles and some other species. It's very interesting, the difference between them. And that's good too, because that helps with identifying, like if some person pops up, which is definitely possible, but if some person pops up the way they have been with Spangleri and Galbinifrons, Platysternum lately, big-headed turtles, flowerback box turtles, here in the West, in the western part of the world here, selling smuggled animals. If it's a japonica, it's much easier than really any species that I can think of to identify a captive animal versus a wild caught animal, because the shape is almost always different.
Yeah.
What would you say is causing those differences in the shell? Would it just be a more rich, consistent diet, or sun exposure, humidity? What would cause that, do you think?
I would guess it's the same. It's the same that we talked about with the accelerated and surpassing growth. I would hypothesize that it was the same, but I don't know how you prove that. Zach?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could experimentally, it's a testable hypothesis how this would, play out. But if I had to guess, similar to Anthony, there's the nutritional factor, as well as, although these animals don't appear to be, specialists in the sense that they feed on one particular prey item, I would assume they're specialists in the sense that they prey on specific items, and it could be the combination and the seasonality of those, because we do know that the diet shifts in the colder seasons versus the summer versus sort of the fall. And so these differences in feeding habit in combination with temperature and other behaviors, these could be part of it, as well as it could be some sort of selective pressure for this particular shape, and these sort of flatter ones, maybe they don't exist as much. But I think that's probably less likely. I think it is probably developmental than anything. Even the small ones, it's quite obvious that they're wild.
I agree. And moss. Usually they have moss on their shell. And one thing that was interesting that we talked about is the folks in the Ryukyus have different names for different appearances. So they break it down even further within the Yamagame. It's not just Yamagame for all of them. There's some of them, we know that this species, and that was one of the first things I saw in the Turtle Conservancy video maybe 15 years ago, is that Dr. Otani talked about the prevalence of red Yamagame versus the browner ones or the yellower ones. And then there's some that are very mossy as well. And that was another piece of these animals. Like if you had a wild caught Yamagame, the chances are there's going to be some moss on the shell that you wouldn't see with a captive animal as well. But I was just wondering, can you tell us some of those names for some of the different appearances and some of the different phases or appearances that Yamagame may have?
I can go. You can go. This is
So Yamagame is we in general we call Yamagame Ryukyu Yamagame, but we just use the short version Yamagame. And local people call Yambaru Gami. Yambaru means North Okinawa forest, and Gami means turtle, kame.
Gami.
Gami.
Okay.
Yambaru Gami.
Gami.
And depends on the color, people call kurogami, which means black turtle, or akagami. Aka means red, so red turtle. So there are some name depend on the color or for local people, but even the local people don't realize this is Ryukyu, Yamagame, or just other yellow pond turtle. So people randomly call Yamagami or Kurogami, Akagami.
Yeah, it's basically, if it's red, akagami. If it's black, kurogami. And again, black really denotes the moss, and it's sort of like a dead moss. And you only see that in the forest, I should say. You don't see it like, maybe a few weeks ago we were with Mr. Otani and found one in a less wooded area, and the animal looked as if it were a pet. The shell was beautiful red, the skin was red, almost as if it had been cleaned and polished, but it's a wild animal. So just depending on where they live will also predict, as you would imagine, the level of moss growth, in which makes it obvious the colors.
Mm-hmm.
And the different colloquial names remind me of different colloquial names for various turtles in the state. And the one I spend my most time working with is the wood turtle. And there are parts of like the mountains of central PA. Some people jokingly call them like the Pennsyltucky. They're very like rural, backwoodsy. The wood turtles out there get like really like red orange legs and stuff, and so like they're known as old redlegger. Is kind of like the local term for the wood turtle, is just old redlegger, because they recognize it by its bright red legs. Where we work, they're more of an orange than getting towards that red. But I thought that was interesting, comparing to what we see even in parts of the States with those like local terms for different turtles. So I was actually thinking, it'd be cool to hear you walk us through maybe a general description of what your project is, and then maybe even like what does it look like on a day when you go out into the field to work with these turtles? Like what kind of gear do you end up needing, and then like when you capture a turtle, what does that process look like before you put it back?
Sure. You want to? Okay. All right. So I guess how we sort of started on this. Maybe that kind of sets the scene. 2017, she and I both moved here to Okinawa independently. We didn't know each other. We really like the outdoors. Anytime someone takes a job in Okinawa, it's typically an excuse to, live the island life and, explore the nature. There's lots of waterfalls and things like this. The north of Okinawa is sort of a protected region called the Yambaru National Park. We just call it Yambaru Forest. But up there, you start to see these road signs. And there'll be a sign, many of these are the sort of protected species, a sign that says, slow down, don't kill this newt or this ground gecko or this bird or this rat, all these different species. And one of the signs is a turtle. And the turtles, we thought, well, that's interesting. We haven't seen one of these turtles before. And, once we got, sort of into it, we realized that they are this sort of national monument or national natural monument. And we became, interested to find one. And Googling around, we found Mr. Otani. He had a pet shop in an area more in the southern part of Okinawa called Okinawa City. And so we went and visited him, and he takes people on tours. If he likes you, sort of thing. It's very much, he's, you don't want to take anybody out to the forest to see these rare turtles. But, he seemed to like us enough, and the sort of deal is you take a trip up north, you stay overnight at one of the flats up there, and then you wake up early in the morning and you go out to the field. And, we thought finally we're going to see one. And even when we went with him, we didn't see any. Now, funnily enough, we found out that where he took us is actually the same field site that we work at now. So it was kind of a 2-for-1 deal. I think he was working and, making a little extra on the side type thing. So good for him. But he realized, these two individuals keep contacting me about the turtles. And he was sort of, confirming everything that we had thought. There's no protection. You're the only person. And we asked, are you getting paid? And he's like, no, this is like a labor of love. Like I just do this because I like the animals. And so that's sort of how we started, our organization. And it was, we saw that his methods were sort of, the standard, catch, mark, and then recapture type of system. And I thought, we have some background in science. Maybe we could scale this operation up. Again, being naive, we didn't understand how difficult it would be to work with the government on this project. We thought we can scale this up. We can find people who work with captive animals. My background is more in behavior. Maybe we can, work with captive people or the zoo to understand a little bit more about how they're behaving and give us insight on maybe where to look and maybe how to design studies in the field. And that's sort of where it all started, and sort of where we're at now is sort of the expansion of the field study that's been, again, ongoing. And a day in the life is that we typically leave quite early in the morning from the south. We live in a village that's maybe 2 hours from the field site. Is that right? 2.5 hours. We go up there and, we park the car, and we're typically very suited up. So there's snakes, there's, mosquitoes, there's leeches, everything you can imagine. Although it is beautiful, it's, there's extremely high risk to go up there. And the risk really starts on the drive because there's no internet service. There's no signal. And some of these snakes up there are, they kill people every year. The dangerous vipers called the habu. And there's a few different versions or, species, but one of them is highly aggressive to the point where if it sees you, it comes after you. It's not, I see you, I'll stay or run. It comes after you. And so you're having to wear, very high boots and suits. And let me remind you that it is 30, 31, 32 C. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. It's like 90 something, I think. It's quite hot and it's humid. It's so humid that it literally just starts raining in the middle of what you're doing. And so it's very hot, humid. There's snakes, there's spiders everywhere. And again, we're walking through areas where there's sunlight with darkness. So it's this contrast with your eyes of trying to adjust because it'll be extremely bright and then you'll walk through some trees and it's pitch black. And these animals appear to like to hang out on that sort of edge where they can, get the sunlight, but then be able to get out of it when they need to. And they're typically always found in very strange, not where you would think to find a turtle. You don't see them just sitting on the ground or walking around. They're halfway off of a cliff looking at you, or they're on the side of a tree, like vertical, or you go into a cave and there's one upside down holding on. Very unusual. And that's what really made me more interested coming from behavior side. Like this, not only is it a cool turtle, it's pretty, it needs conservation, but behaviorally it's so strange. And it will not attempt to charge you. And it will not attempt to also flee and just jump off of a hill and just start rolling. And we found them in streams. I remember we walked right into a stream and just looking like, where are we going to go? And I looked down and I was like, there's one right there. And it was pretending to almost be a stone. It was under the water, only the tip of the shell, and it's pulled in and its head is looking at me through the water as it kind of like, there's these like little waves over its head, thinking I haven't seen it. And so you never find one just hanging out. They're in these, again, very unusual positions. I'm trying to think, we found them in ancient ruins. So there's these ancient ruins where probably not that ancient, maybe 100 years ago, the indigo plant was grown here, and the manufacture of this dye was sort of carried out in the north in Yamagame forest. And, we found them in and around those ruins. And so again, you're in some ancient ruin and it's, hanging out like this is my little kingdom type thing, right? So it's very unusual. But once we find one, and again, we only work with the animals right now that are in the field site that I mentioned. That's again roughly 3 kilometers long. But the standard stuff, right? You identify male from female. If it's less than 105 millimeters, it's not sexed and it's not considered. It's typically unsexable at that point, anyways. If they are still juveniles and unsexable, but they are over that length of 105 millimeters, they are marked in a whole, elaborate measurements from, various points on the shell. Any anatomical deformities or unique parts are marked as well as photographed. How many ticks they might have. They typically have ticks on top of the shells. So the ticks will, go right through the shell or right on the edges of the scutes. all in and around the neck and the tails. So they're covered in ticks normally. I don't think we've ever seen one without ticks. So we kind of keep note of those types of things, the coloration, again, lots of photography on the animal and its location, different biometrics, weight, things of this nature. And then, exactly, what we think, the situation was. Sometimes you'll find them with their face will be covered and you think, oh, this one has a disease. And then you look around and you realize, oh, they've been eating some slugs. And so they'll have dry slime all over their face, and they look like they can't even open their mouth, like it's like frozen or something, right? But yeah, that's sort of a day in the life of this field work, just going into the forest, in and around the forest, and looking for animals. And we see everything, all sorts of cool animals. It's not just the turtles. But do you have anything to add?
No, I think.
When
Thank
you
you.
find them with
that was fantastic.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kevin. Go.
just quick follow up. When you find them with ticks on them, are you allowed to remove the ticks? I don't know that process.
We don't remove the ticks.
Okay.
For that research, but yeah, they tend to go to in the water when they have too much ticks, so the ticks remove.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
that's a sort of an anecdote from Mr. Otani. That's sort of a behavior that he'll see them soaking in the water, and that's sort of what's thought. That hasn't, I think, been fully examined, but we also see them in the water on really hot days as well. So we don't know if they're cooling off or getting rid of the ticks or both. We don't actually know, but we don't touch them. It's just they're left on there. I think there's some concern of if you remove the tick and it's not removed properly, or there's an open wound, we could introduce something unwanted to the situation. That especially given that field site, again, if there's 900 unique individuals potentially living there at one time, that's quite dense population. Well, I don't know if it's quite dense, but we'll just say that there's a lot of animals. And I would assume if one were to get sick, and especially if there's any pathogen, bacterial or viral, it could spread throughout that population quite quickly. So we don't try to intervene at that level at all.
Okay.
What method are you using to identify the turtles as individuals? Are you using some type of tag or notches?
Yep, it's a marking system. So this might be published somewhere. So Mr. Otani has this sort of method of he's sort of numbered the scutes, and there's sort of the tens and 100s and the lower number. So he'll mark the shell, and there's like a sort of like a piece of like clay, like a dental cement. Is that what it is? It sort of puts into the mark spot. And so once that wears out, the animal looks perfectly, fine. The shell's smooth and everything, but there's a sort of where the sort of indentation was made, there's a small piece of clay that'll sort of slightly discolor, but it doesn't, it's not like a strong marking that you could see, because that's a big concern. The birds will see the turtle and kill them if it's a distinct marking, and we're not allowed to do the pit tagging.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just a shell marking system, literally. I can image. Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's like a step past notching. It's like notching, but then filling it in. I think that's cool. Mm-hmm. It's really cool. Mm-hmm. And one thing that you mentioned that I wanted to just touch on, this species has such a unique natural history in terms of their behavior. And it's cool, Zach, to hear that you have that background in behavior. You mentioned like you'll find them kind of on these cliff sides or mountain sides or what have you, but that's the environment that they live in. And I think back to that video, that Turtle Conservancy video from 15 plus years ago that details these folks going out, these turtle conservationists from really around the world. They're not all American, but most of them are American, going out with Mr. Otani or Otani-san to see the Yamagame in the wild. And he told them to bring flashlights, and they didn't listen. Because they're like, well, we're going out in the day. Why would we need flashlights? And these turtles live in these crevices, these holes, these caves in the mountainside, sort of. So these steep mountainsides that they live on. So that's what they do, and they do climb really well. I was just talking to. I just got back from the Turtle and Tortoise Preservation Group annual conference. Just got back yesterday, and I was talking to one of the few Japanese, Ryukyu Black-Breasted Leaf Turtle or Yamagame breeders in the U.S., and he said, "Man, those things can climb out of anything, and especially the males." And it's true; they do like to climb.
Yeah.
And mine have a good system that keeps them in, but they definitely climb into each other's because I keep them separately. They definitely climb into each other's spaces over the walls that I've made for them. They just so anyway. Can you speak a little bit to that? Like you're finding them everywhere. You're finding them in the water. You're finding them out and about. They cross the roads. I know they find themselves in those roads, those concrete culverts on the sides of the road. So they're definitely a species that moves. But are they all living in those caves in the mountainside?
Yeah, so for sure not. I think that's sort of something that was noticed and it's sort of been kind of passed along over the years. I don't really think that that's the case at all. I mean, I should say part of this is we have to be careful for the sake of the animal, describing exactly where we find them because of the issues with poaching. But in general, finding them in a hole or in a this sort of rocky spot, it would appear that people might sort of get tunnel vision if you only think that's where they're at and that's all you're going to find them. You're not going to find them everywhere else. And the reality is, I've only found a small percentage actually in holes like that. And I think it's probably seasonal. These animals are trying to find, a place to sort of hunker down when it gets cold. In the wintertime, it'll be close to 10 C and the temperature is cooler in the mountains. So even today, it's maybe, 20, 21 C. It'll typically be a few degrees cooler in the mountains. And so once it starts getting cooler, I think that's when they're maybe using those caves. I don't know for sure. Do you know what Mr. Otani has said about them using caves?
Using caves.
Are they using the caves only in the wintertime, or are they all?
He doesn't specifically mention.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be, I think that, that some are clearly utilizing those, but another concern I've had is that when you find them, they're not like sleeping. They're not like in a hole. For all we know, they saw us coming. They heard us coming, and then
Right.
they ran off. And so without, really good, setting up a camera and seeing where they come and go, for all we know that, that it was just happened to be a safe place to run. We found, two females in sort of a small hole before as well. And we don't know of them sharing dens or anything, and it was a very hot summer day, so we think that maybe they saw us and kind of hid in that spot because of the multiple levels around there. They're typically going to hear you before anything, but the distance traveled would indicate that they're not staying around that hole probably too much anyways. Mr. Otani has found them to travel over 1 kilometer. So when he's doing these, even within that field site of 3 kilometers, he'll find one, that's already been marked over 1 kilometer away sometimes. So they're clearly traveling around. It's not, they're isolated to some small den that they're sort of protecting or something like that and staying in.
That's interesting.
Nomadic. Yeah.
Do you know what the clutch size is? Is that something that you or Mr. Otani see out in the field? Is animals laying eggs, or have they ever been radiographed, X-rayed before, or anything like that? Because I'm really interested with that smaller adult size, if they're producing as many eggs as we see in captivity.
I think they've only bred him when he was at the zoo. He had bred them, but not in the wild. It isn't clear, and maybe that is why they're using those caves, as places to put their eggs. We don't know.
But how many eggs? Do you know how many eggs?
One, I think.
That's what I was wondering, because in captive animals we're seeing clutches of 2 and 3 because they're bigger. So I was wondering if it would be only 1 egg.
I think it's only one. we can check. I don't recall seeing anything any over 2. I've seen hatchling. I've seen small. I've seen images from his work where 2 eggs have hatched in a, in an incubation setup, but I don't know if they came from the same clutch. So that's something we can find out for you.
It's interesting. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Something else about those caves is that it's cooler in those caves in the summertime. So, we'll take a thermal gun and it can be 30 outside of it, but 27 or something inside. So it is cooler, and they, it would make sense that they could use that as a mechanism to thermoregulate, opposed to having to find a stream, because the streams really open them up to predation.
Well, I would also think the cave might provide a more normalized incubation temperature. It doesn't swing as high or low either. Like, I know my one Spanglary, she always lays in her hide that's in her habitat. She always goes in there to dig and buries them there. So I thought that was interesting that you're talking about caves as potential nesting site as well, plus regulating the temperature so it doesn't get too hot. Especially if japonica eggs could be as temperature sensitive to heat as the Spanglary eggs could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good hypothesis worth testing. It's very feasible, and it makes sense, in sort of a just so way. So I think, it's something we're very interested in, because although we don't know, one thing that we do know is that when we find animals, we can find them in the same places. So we have a few favorite animals that we've sort of named, and if all goes wrong and we can't find them where we're supposed to be looking, we're like, let's go look over here and say hi, because we know we can always trust and find that 1 or 2 animals that lives in those locations. And they tolerate us, our presence very well. They're not super shy or anything.
I think one thing that, for me, with regards to field work, or just answering anyone's questions about animals, one of my favorite things is when someone asks a question and we answer, scientists don't know the answer. We don't know how many eggs they're producing in the wild, or where they're putting their eggs. Are they putting them in the caves outside? Why are they in the water sometimes? And sometimes I almost find that when you're doing a lot of research in the field, once you come to a conclusion on something, not a definitive conclusion, but a general idea, that can be really rewarding. So what is something that you find that's really rewarding about some of the work that you're doing? Just, I'm sure it's really enjoyable working with them, but is there anything specific that you find the most rewarding?
Anything from you?
I couldn't fully understand.
So she's asking, what is the most rewarding part of this, work with the animal? Is there anything that you enjoy the most, or besides just going out and being outside, which I know you do like?
Yeah, I didn't know that animal is so beautiful. We saw the animal in the zoo a little bit far, but to touch the animal, see the animal so close, they're very beautiful and cute. So this is the
Rewarding.
rewarding.
Yeah, I love that.
For me, I searched for a long time to find an animal that I wanted to do research on in more of an academic setting, and I always thought I would work with reptiles, especially lizards. And then once I've sort of started working with the turtle, I realized I need to find the right species, and then I happen to be in probably the best place. If I can get the permission, my most rewarding thing for me is going to be to understand the behavior in the natural setting. How are they socially interacting? Are they communicating with one another? These types of behaviors, that's going to be, I think, the most rewarding. But so far, it's just been, seeing how they fit into the natural world and seeing the foods that they eat. They kind of break all of the rules from what I know about people. We have a pet tortoise, and we know sort of the limits of what they're supposed to eat. But these turtles, they kind of prey on foods that you wouldn't think. So they like citrus fruits, and so they commonly go to plantation areas where they plant all of these, citrus fruits, kind of like an orange, sort of like an orange, more sour, but that's that's a food for them. Like it's like that's where they like that type of food, or they eat frogs. They eat all sorts of things that you wouldn't think a turtle would eat, because you think they're slow, but these things can really hunt things down. I think people post online they eat the worms. They feed them a lot of worms, and early on we never saw any worms, and I was always like, why are they always feeding the animals worms online? I guess it's because they like it. They have this behavioral response. And then recently we found these giant worms. And then that's when I realized, like, okay, one of these worms could feed a whole turtle family. These worms, you can probably Google this, like it was over 30 centimeters worm. And it's like an earthworm, and it's like sort of blue iridescent, but but they're giant. I mean, we thought it was a snake. I couldn't see either end. I was like, that's a snake. It's so big. And so to know that they're probably preying on those types of foods is quite interesting. And also they like to eat the figs. It's something that we've been told, because you can see it in the poop. They eat in the seeds of the fig. And fig trees grow everywhere. So to know that they could potentially be playing
seed disperser.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't know if those seeds are actually viable. It's a very simple assay, right? Just plant the poop and see if it grows. You could be more, high tech, but they very well might be sort of really crucial in that landscape for dispersing seeds, along with bats and everything else that lives there. But yeah.
Actually, it's so funny you said that. I was finishing up a book last night, and it's about bats. It's by the owner of Bat Conservation International. And he said that exact sentiment, that they took some bat guano that had seeds in it, and they planted it and compared it to the growth rate for figs that were not passed through feces. And they compared the growth rate, and they said it was about 80% germination rate for the ones in the eliminations from the turtles. And then if it had not passed through a GI tract, there was about a 2% germination rate. So it's really interesting that you say that. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Right?
Yeah, the bats are.
Is this the worm?
That one,
get out. Is that the worm?
I mean, a worm's a worm
what
for
I'm reading
me,
on
but
there.
the one we saw it's very blue iridescent color. Like I'm not sure, but it very well could have been. It's dark, when we saw it. So
Yikes.
But yeah, the bats are the bats are also in the tree, so you see the bats quite often when you're working around these animals. So when you get too close, you just hear the wings like, and they'll take off.
Wild.
But many times they're very curious. They kind of hang out. They're the large, like the really cute, almost like canine type.
The flying foxes.
Yeah.
Adorable.
That's
I
really
saw
so
you
cool.
looking for worm photos.
That's really cool. Well, and the citrus, that surprised me. So just to be clear, it sounded like these citrus fruits are being planted, so they're not natural, but they eat them. Is that correct? Are they farming naturally occurring citrus, or is this something that's just a crop that's been introduced in the last 100 years?
I'm not sure. I should mention that this plant grows naturally in the forests when you're hiking, but we don't know if that's from past, from some event. But they clearly farm this in remote areas. So even though the Yambaru, it's a national park, you can still buy land. You can still farm land. You can still do things. But the rules are a little different than what you would think as an American. And so people, again, they tend to be local farmers. They'll, a very small plot of land. Again, they'll clear the trees, and then they'll plant these shikwasa trees or these kabuchi trees. So kabuchi is the one fruit. Like a lime. And then the shikwasa is sort of like.
It's also similar.
More orangey. Yeah, this is shikwasa. Yeah, and they love this plant. That's something that Mr. Otani has mentioned, that he sees a shift in the diet. What is it, the wintertime? They're eating more shikwasa? Or is it summer?
Summer.
Well, Let's look.
I'm taking a lot of notes just so everyone knows.
Yeah, I can follow up. Basically,
Yeah.
there's a shift from in looking again, this sort of crude analysis. Again, we're going to take a slightly more sophisticated, high tech approach to these sort of feeding events. Where we're finding them, and then the sort of foods that we think that they're eating based on the poop. But there's definitely a shift in the season. So there's sort of when the insects are around, it can be a high protein diet, but in months where there's less insects, they can easily shift over to a slightly different diet, because although it does cool down, they don't really brumate or anything like that. You can wear shorts if you wanted to pretty much most of the year, and it might be cool for a few days, but the sun comes out, and it's reasonable to assume that the animals also come out, and I think they're spotted sort of year round. So mostly in July, but you see them throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting. What are your needs in terms of support? What are you looking to grow, and what could you use funding for, that sort of thing? I know that you're, if I'm remembering correctly, you're not a nonprofit at this point, but it works differently there, is my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what do you need as we look forward towards the future?
Yeah. So I should say that. So the I guess an analogous type of company in the U.S. would be like an LLC, I think. And so the LLC here can be a for-profit or a nonprofit system, and you just have to pick. And so we're doing the nonprofit version of LLC. Now there is a technical NPO, which is like the Turtle Room, but that requires a slightly different structure and more board members. So that's why we are functioning as a sort of, again, a sort of LLC that's nonprofit. So I guess that's sort of the starting point. I'd say things that are needed. We really want to do the work more. Like if we could be out, in the north more often, we would. And one of the drawbacks that Mr. Otani has is that he does pretty much oddball jobs to make money. Like takes if they're building a resort, maybe he'll get hired to check out the land to make sure there's no endangered species. He might does whatever he can to make money, and we're really trying to support him, who will in turn support us with his teachings. And so being able to help him with some fuel money and get him up there, and like get him equivalent of like an Airbnb to keep him up there a little more often, because when we look at his data, it's pretty much sporadic. He didn't go for again, we have 20 years of data here, and you can see it must have been a good month, and in a few months he didn't go up there at all, and then he goes up there more. And it's really based probably around income. We're fully funding this ourselves. That's something I've said. I want to make some money in the business world and then bring it into this project. But another area that we really need support in is just the sort of the time side. We can't really maintain like a social media account, which we know is arguably the most important side, because we need the outreach and education, and that's something we really need support with. Designers. What do we have on here? We're trying to have more panel meetings with the local government, which is again a very unique and Japanese thing to do. But what you do is you get a bunch of people that are important in the community, and you make your plea to them and say, we need support, and their support isn't financial. It's let us do a field site in this other protected area, in this other land, or on this other property, or introduce us to somebody who can allow us to expand the field site. And so holding those types of sort of press events or panel events, it's good that when we can show international support. And so through letters of support or individual quotes by keepers, zoos, whatever the institution is, experts in the field, those types of things, I think, go a long way, because it shows to the local people there's a whole world out there that's interested in this animal, and so should you. And so that's one way to support us. And then obviously just random kit, right? Just the sort of nuts and bolts of doing this type of work. if there's only one scale and there's two turtles, you have to wait, right? If one person, if we could start at opposite ends of a path to get to the middle faster to optimize it, having two sets of everything would be nice. We can bring some really nice photos and videos to the world if we have the right gear. And as I mentioned earlier, it goes from light to dark to light to dark. If you're set up for a light and only set up and you see one in the dark, you have to reset up and back and forth. And having, potentially some better gear other than a phone could be useful, because if they're in the dark setting, we can really capture what's going on there, as well as do sort of longer recordings and then share that, because I know people want to know what are they doing when we're not around. And so we're thinking that type of stuff. Anything else? We're looking for military people, people in the military community to support us. Okinawa is roughly 15% covered by military bases. And some of the primary spots, I should say, this is probably the most militarized area in the world for U.S. bases, given the area. So 15% of Okinawa Island is covered. And the Marines have a really nice training set up in the north. And so we're really trying to find Marines or work with the consulate here. And if there's anybody who has that connection, that'd be great. Some officer who, might be able to get us in a meeting with the consulate or something like that to get on base, because we've been told that that's some of the most ancient, potential primary forest in all of Okinawa. And it's nothing more than a fence. And so we don't know that there's clearly not going to be a lot of, gene transfer over that fence, and we have no idea what's going on over there. And rightfully so, it's protected for a good purpose. But if we could have anybody in the community who's connected, we would love to do that type of field work on the base as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. Wow.
Yeah.
And that fence is such that the animals can't get under it.
I don't know. Some of these might
They
even
might
be
climb over it.
I was
They
going to
might.
say, are they able to climb?
Yeah, I mean, most of, again, as I mentioned, roughly 15%, but it's the jungle train. Like, you can get on Google Maps and probably find it. It's the sort of more in Higashi Village. There's an area called the U.S. Marines Jungle Warfare Training, and it's we know an individual we've met before who owns some property up there, and they've said that there could be some interesting turtles over there. And
they didn't cut the tree for a long time, so that's but the place must be really interesting.
yeah.
Can you share your social media handles so that if any of our listeners or viewers want to help support you, they can find you?
Yes, so we have Instagram, which is just Okinawa Kame Center. The center is spelled British style. Should I type that in here?
Oh,
Okay,
there you
here
go.
it is.
Yep, Steve's got it right below.
Steve's got it.
And
Steve's the man.
You can also visit our website, which is just okinawa-kame.org. And, we hope to provide more information there. We've considered making a Patreon account or having somebody make it with us. And, one of the things that we know that has of high value to people abroad is Mr. Otani's work. And so being able to translate this into English and, share it with the world, about all of these details about what they eat, where he find, I guess as much as we can possibly say without, revealing how to find the animal itself, we want to share that information and lots of great old photos. We want to share with people, and we think that could be a potential way to support the field work that we're doing. And, for the future, once the funds become available, and again, I'm trying to support this as much as I can myself, is do really some deeper, molecular and genomic analyses of this species, mostly because it hasn't really been done so well with turtles, but really hoping that this will put the Yamagame on a pedestal, around the world, because when people look at a really nice reference genome of a turtle, maybe they can use the Yamagame, and that will, make people think, oh, what is this animal? That's a future project.
Mm-hmm.
Does the Am I muted? I'm not muted. Good.
Nope.
Does the does the U.S. dollar translating to the Japanese yen give any help here
Yes.
in terms like the dollar goes further in Japan?
Yes,
Okay.
it does. Right now, it for sure it's $1 buys 1.3 yen.
I just looked it up and it said 1 point.
Well,
It said 148.
140, almost 150 yen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
148 yen. But I wasn't sure. Then is it yen? Does the yen have the same value as a dollar does in the U.S.? I think probably not. But I'm sure that it goes further there, is what I was guessing.
Yes, it does, and it's quite common knowledge for people who are in the military here. They know to shop off base, because it goes a lot further.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's great when we think about the future and trying to funnel some money towards your project and to support the great work that you're doing and will do in the future. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. So as we look to wrap up the episode, because it's that time, I'd just like to say, first of all, again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for reaching out. We had talked about it before we officially went live, kind of how this worked with us finding each other, and really you guys found me because you were looking to just connect with people who were working with Yamagame of any in any capacity. So I'm very grateful for that partnership and the opportunity to get to know you both over the years here and to see the amazing work you do and how passionate you are. These turtles, I said I was at this conference and a lot of people bought my book that's on the Vietnamese Black-Breasted Leaf Turtle and also the Yamagame. And every time I sign my book, almost every time I write, thank you for caring about these little turtles because they need as many people to care about them as possible. And you guys are like the top of that list, and obviously Mr. Otani, the very, very top of that list. So I just want to say thank you for that. Does anyone have any closing thoughts or final questions?
I was just pumped to be here and listen. This is amazing. Thank you.
Wasn't this a cool
thank
episode?
you for sharing your information with us. It's really fascinating. I love hearing about your stories. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Really enjoyed hearing about what that looks like, and even just like what a day out in the field can look like for you guys. So that was really cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
And since November is the season for being thankful, thank you both for being here and for sharing everything with us. And also thank you to Anthony, Kevin, and Steve for having me be here as a host with you guys. And then especially thank you to all of our listeners and supporters for following along on this journey with us.
Oh, you're sweet.
Indeed.
Yeah.
As of now, our next episode is scheduled for December 4th, which happens to be World Wildlife Day. So
Ooh.
Wow.
perfect timing, right?
Yeah.
World Wildlife Conservation Day. So, yep. Good time to have a podcast if I ever saw one, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm going to look, I don't know how much you see this, Zach, and I just want to say too, another thought that popped in my head. I don't know how often you guys see these turtles breeding in the wild, like where you could actually see courtship and how it starts and then what it looks like when things happen and everything. So I'm going to start taking some videos for you to share with you as well so that you can see, because those don't really exist that much either. It's a species that not many people have. And so that's something I watch all the time with 4
So,
males
Anthony,
and 9 females here. Yeah.
Sorry, this is a question for you then. Do you think their mating behavior, breeding behavior could be varied because of their morphology by being in captivity?
I don't think it's varied by the morphology necessarily, although maybe. I think there's one male here who's about 200 grams, who's about the size of the males that they mentioned about in the wild. And and then there's some females that are more like 500. So for him, he's kind of like on top, but then needs to realize that he needs to come backwards to not be in the middle of her back. So so I do think that it affects it in that way, but I think it's interesting with a bunch of different animals to see the different this is something I first noticed when I was breeding bearded dragons in college. Like sometimes there's a young male and the female won't be interested in what's happening with the young male, but she is with the older male. And I see that a lot with japonica, where there's this kind of pecking order and there are some males who are very successful, except with the very mature female, and then there's other males who handle things a little bit different way, and that mature female is more likely to accept his advances. It's very interesting. So anyway, I'll start taking videos so that you guys can see what's going on here with the captive ones and compare it to what you're seeing as well.
Yes, please do. That's actually part of what we're trying to do now is get the biological samples. So we're trying to, if we have 900, say, turtles in this field site, what is the effective population? We don't know how many of those are actually breeding. And that's really the most important, I guess, number to know for the conservation effort, because if we see that even though it's densely populated and only less than 10% are actual breeding, maybe it's not as good as we think it is.
Well, they're turtles and they lay one egg, so it's never as good as you think it is, because losing, they're animals that lay a small amount of eggs usually don't have to compete with a lot of natural predators that are really, hurting them.
Yes.
So then you add humans to the mix, and then those animals are always the ones that are most susceptible to human-related issues. They're not always, but often. Anyway, but thank you. I could talk about this for days, not just hours, but for days straight before needing to take a break and take a nap. So thank you again so much, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. And we'll see you on December 4th. And thanks for a great show.
Thanks. Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye.